This is Unit 4.6. This is the last notes guide for first semester, so congrats on making it halfway through. In this unit, we're looking at progressivism. We're going to look at how people, mostly urban middle class people, tried to fix the problems in society. A lot of the problems that we've discussed in 4.1 through 4.5. So in those units, we looked at the Industrial Revolution and how the economy built because of the railroad, and that was kind of what spurred it on. And then we looked at big businesses and monopolies and the negative aspects of that, as well as some of the positives. We looked at urbanization and immigration and some of the problems that came along with that. So in this unit, we're looking at how progressivism is going to develop because concerned citizens want to fix some of the problems in the cities, the workplace, and the government. This is a movement of the middle class who objected to paying taxes to corrupt city governments and desired better city services. So this is kind of similar to the populist movement that we discussed in the previous, in 4.4. It's not exactly the same because it's not farmers. This is mostly middle class people, but they're going to take a lot of the same ideas that the populists wanted, and they're actually going to follow through with them. And some of those populist ideas are going to become laws and amendments during this time period. The media plays a big role. I mean, it still does today. These muckrakers were journalists that investigated corporations, and they point out bad conditions in the factories, the corruption in the government, and the power of the monopolists. So they would take pictures of what was happening in the factories and put it in the newspapers. And so that would show what was happening. You can't deny that there's a problem when you see a picture of it. So that sheds light. These muckrakers shed light on some of that problem, some of the muck that's going on in society. The most famous is Upton Sinclair. He wrote his book, The Jungle, about the meatpacking industry, which I'm sure you've heard of. And we'll actually, I'll probably play you a clip in class of The Jungle. Women are also going to be a big part of the social reform movement. So part of the standard is to compare the women's rights movement with progressivism. And they kind of go hand in hand. They kind of work together. The movement west helped women get the right to vote. Western states generally allowed women to vote before Eastern states because the more voters that a state had, the quicker they could become an actual state. African American women also got involved, and they formed the National Association of Colored Women to promote equal rights and suffrage. Women also became increasingly frustrated they don't have a political voice. And so the suffrage movement is going to increase, and it's going to intensify. If you remember, we talked about the original one with Susan B. Anthony and Lucretia Mott, and then we talked about Seneca Falls. That was kind of the start of the women's suffrage movement. Now women are really going to be pushing hard for the right to vote. And there are some famous women during this women's suffrage movement as well. Carrie Chapman Catt. She's going to try to lobby state legislatures to give women suffrage, so she's going to do it on like a state level. While Alice Paul is going to break away from Catt, and she's going to lobby for the national government to make an amendment on women's suffrage. And she's going to be a lot more radical than Carrie Chapman Catt. And I'm going to show you a couple clips of a movie called Iron Jawed Angels, which shows Alice Paul and how she was a lot more radical than Carrie Chapman Catt. And they are going to do a lot more things to try to convince people that women should get the right to vote. As a result of those things, women do get the right to vote with the 19th Amendment in 1919. Paul engaged in marches, and she picketed the White House. They actually got arrested for picketing the White House, and so they did hunger strikes while they were in jail. Because of all that, like I said, the 19th Amendment was passed, which gave women suffrage, which means the right to vote. Then Paul's even go further and try and campaign for an equal rights amendment, but it actually never passed. Another famous woman at the time was Jane Addams. She started the Hull House, which was meant to help immigrants. So think about it, these immigrants coming from these different places, they don't speak English, they just come over on the boat and they don't really know what's going on. So Jane Addams tried to help them by giving them an education, teaching them English. She also offered child care so they could go get a job. So this Hull House was meant to help immigrants. Very important. You're going to need to know Jane Addams and the Hull House. We're going to talk about a few of the presidents of the time, two of the presidents specifically at the time, the two most progressive of the presidents. The first was Theodore Roosevelt. Remember I said that he was the vice president under William McKinley? Well, William McKinley was assassinated, which allowed President Theodore Roosevelt, allowed him to become president. He's going to use something called the bully pulpit. As a president, you have a unique position in that people will listen to you when you talk. And so he uses this bully pulpit to push progressive reforms. He gets involved in the coal miners' strike, and he basically tells the company that they have to negotiate with the coal miners, and he kind of forces workers to get some rights because he forces the company to give some workers some rights. Legislation is also passed to give the Interstate Commerce Commission power over the railroads, and so that means the railroads won't quite have the monopoly that they once did. He also supports government regulation of monopolies. He uses the Sherman Antitrust Act. He's sometimes called the trust buster. Remember, trusts are monopolies. And so he actually goes out and bust up monopolies. He also tries to protect the consumers through the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act. He read the jungle, noticed the bad conditions, saw how bad things were with labeling products, and there was actually medicines that were labeled incorrectly, and sometimes medicine was just liquor, and he wanted to try to fix that. And so he does that through the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act. He also helps to set aside a lot of land in the West. A lot of these national parks, he conserves a lot of land. Critics will say that he just wanted to set it aside because he wanted it as hunting grounds, but he does set aside a lot of that land as conservation that we have today, like Yellowstone National Park, for instance. In 1912, he wanted to run for president again, but he didn't get the Republican nomination, so he actually tried to run as a third-party candidate, which was known as the Bull Moose Party. He started the Progressive Party, and he ends up losing because basically you have two Republicans. You have Theodore Roosevelt and William Howard Taft that run. So just like in the election that Lincoln won, they're going to split the vote. And so a Democrat's going to win because of that. And that's Woodrow Wilson. And Woodrow Wilson is a very progressive president as well. Woodrow Wilson is progressive in a few ways. He actually helps get the Clayton Antitrust Act passed, which allows labor unions to be exempt from antitrust laws, which is a good thing, because what was happening under the Sherman Antitrust Act was that labor unions were considered to be monopolies, and that's, of course, not true. And so this actually exempts labor unions from antitrust laws. They also get the 16th Amendment passed, which allows a progressive income tax. That means the more you make, the more you pay. They passed the 17th Amendment, which allowed for the direct election of senators. Remember, these are two populist ideas from 4.4 that are finally getting passed now. They also passed the first Federal Child Labor Act. Although the Supreme Court does rule it unconstitutional, it's still a big step in that they try to limit child labor. They passed the Federal Reserve Act to regulate the money supply, and that's what we actually have today. We have the Federal Reserve, which limits our money supply and sets interest rates and all that. They made credit more readily available to farmers, set an 8-hour workday for some workers, and gave some workers compensation for workers injured on the job. So very progressive, helping the workers. One of the negatives, though, for Woodrow Wilson is he's really not going to do much to help women or African Americans. That's where he isn't very progressive. World War I does limit progressivism. So World War I starts in 1914 in Europe. The U.S. gets involved in 1917. We're fighting a war. As we're fighting a war, we're not really worried about fixing society as much. We're worried about winning the war. And actually, there's a lot of propaganda going on. And one of the things that does get passed is the 18th Amendment, which a lot of people had wanted passed for a while, which was temperance. And what this did was prohibit the sale of alcohol. And it was passed because there was a lot of anti-German sentiments going on during World War I, and there were a lot of grain shortages. So it was easy for it to get passed then, although it's going to cause a lot of problems in the 1920s that you're going to see second semester. After World War I, Woodrow Wilson wrote the 14 points to try to make a peace agreement, and it's very progressive. However, it really doesn't get adopted in the Treaty of Versailles, and the Treaty of Versailles is actually terrible and unprogressive, which we'll talk about in Standard 5. And so people start becoming disillusioned with progressivism. They start to become tired of it. The 19th Amendment is passed to help women get the right to vote, but it really doesn't lead to any significant changes because a lot of women really just voted the exact same way their husbands did. It didn't really make that huge of a difference. So let's compare the women's suffrage movement and the progressive movement. Both are middle-class movements that are used persuasion to get legislation passed. They tried to protest in some cases. They used the media and stuff like that, and they used muckrakers. Both used talented, educated supporters. Both faced significant opposition. Presidents helped the progressive movement, but they really didn't help the women's suffrage movement, as you saw with Woodrow Wilson. And women are eventually going to take a more aggressive approach, and they're going to march and they're going to picket. One of the things to understand is that the progressive movement is a part of a long line of liberal social movements. So you have populism, then you have progressivism, then we're going to have the New Deal, and then we're going to have the Great Society and the Civil Rights Movement. So all of those are going to kind of be lumped together as social reform movements. And so we're going to talk about those in the future. Thank you very much for watching. Please go to Canvas and finish the notes guide and also take the video quiz.